Well, I finally got around to, going to the theaters to watch Midsommar, and I felt like going outside would be like the best way to talk about the film, because a lot of it takes place outside. And it looks really, really pretty. It's the second film by Ari Aster, or is it Ari Aster? I don't know. He's a good director though. He does really spooky stuff. Ari or Ari? Let me know in the comments what you think. And the film stars a bunch of pretty people. I don't know any of their names, but one of them's a who was in Revenant. That child. He plays a child in this. But there's also a dude. And a Swedish dude. Kind of been thinking more about it, real talk though. And honestly, I'm not entirely sure if I like Midsommar more than Hereditary.
I personally liked it so much because I really did like it. I don't even know his name, which is really disgusting since I'm going into film and I have nothing but good things to say about this movie.
Kind of director side of this, kind of being relative unknowns in the industry. I didn't do any research about the film when I went into it.
Oh shit.
Bricks hurt. Let's talk about Midsommar. I was meaning to do a review in the summer, but unfortunately I got somebody dropped a brick and it accidentally hit me. It was a whole accident problem thing. But oh well, at least I have the Blu-ray now, so I guess now I'm just doing a review of a film that has recently come out. So I guess I'm now just going to be seeing if it's worth your time. So the film was, of course, written by my boy Ari Aster and stars kind of a handful of pretty looking people. Don't really know any of their names. The only one I know is Will Poulter, just because he was in Revenant and other stuff. He shows up in a lot of stuff. But everyone else I haven't really seen much from. Here they all are, plus maybe a little write-up from them. Yeah, so the film is essentially about a couple who kind of have a little bit of a rough patch. Some unfortunate tragedy happens on the gal's end, Danny's end, and kind of puts their relationship in kind of a bit of hot water. They all go to college together, and they all are pretty much just preparing to have their theses written and get it published, essentially. And they're wanting to do it on one of their friends' family who lives in kind of a commune, little community in Sweden. And obviously already the alarm bells are going off. We've seen this kind of plot before of, let's go outside of America to this little bizarre rural like place and see what's going on there. And of course this smacks of stuff like Wicker Man, to a much weirder extent Suspiria, stuff like that, of just, we know something's a little fishy, and so it's not going to come at any surprise when all these mild-mannered, seemingly kind village folk start getting a little hot and bothered by the Americans. As far as, like, the actual build-up goes in the way that the trailer advertises the film, it's nothing really new. It doesn't really give anything away. We knew that spooky shit was gonna happen with this clan of Swedes. Like, nothing new there. But the main thing that I do want to talk about is just the technical improvements from Hereditary to Midsommar. And I think both of them need to be brought into context, not because both of them are Ari Aster films, but because both of them are extremely shockingly similar in ways, but also different in their own little way too. They would make a really good double feature. Basically, Hereditary was a stripped down, small scale, isolated, condensed, self-sustaining horror film where the spooky duper tragedy happened, but they moved on with it. And as they were trying to move on with this, the horror themes of it started ruining their chance at getting a happy ending, essentially. Started ruining them trying to be able to cope and deal with what happened. And that's interesting. And it was, at most, just 4 people plus some of, oh god, what the hell's his name? Gosh, I'm getting the senile. Oh boy. It's not, I know it's Alex Wolff, but what the hell's his character's name? Oh, shit. He had his friends, the mother had her support group, stuff like that. So there was other characters involved, but it was mainly, the bottom line was these 4 members of this family trying to deal with stuff. While in this, we have the group of friends, which consists of Danny and Christian, the main couple that's in focus, plus Josh, Mark, and who is originally from this village that they're visiting. So we already have this little batch of friends, and the way that they interact is interesting and very watchable. And once we get to Sweden, we are introduced to all these other characters that aren't really important, because it doesn't really matter, because, you know, why characterize the evil cult? Why do put effort in something like that? But we're introduced to them, and now we're dealing with like 50 people in a shot at one given point, all doing something in the frame. And on the technical level, Ari Aster does an absolutely fabulous job shooting this massive increase of people. Because with Hereditary, it was a lot of long corridors, deep shadows, very, very tight framing. But in this, now we're given wide open fields of people doing stuff, of animals doing their thing, of people picking flowers, of people preparing tables. It's all of this stuff happens while we see the main characters go about what they're doing, and it's absolutely gorgeous. In terms of actual, like, interesting technical stuff, what he knows how to do is focal length and depth of field, and that's something that Ari Aster has almost, I would say, perfected in this. He might have 2 people talking with stuff going on in the background, of course, because it's, you know, they're still preparing for the festivities. And they would be talking, and then somebody else, excuse me, then somebody else would come into the scene, and they would either engage with them and talk with them, they would add something to the conversation, they would leave, either the camera would follow them out and focus on them for a bit, or stay with those characters and use focal length to kind of show patterns in conversation of when the power or when the focus is getting turned, but not cut, which is cool. Because instead of cutting to like, Alexandra, what do you think of this? Oh, I don't know, Davey. What do you think of this? I asked you first, Alexandra. And cut based on who has the power in the conversation. This, just focusing on different depth is how they achieve that, and it's really cool. In terms of actual like shot composition and cinematography, Midsommar is a massive improvement on Hereditary, which is saying something because Hereditary had really good shot composition in my opinion. The scene transitions are absolutely fabulous. There are a few that are kind of the money shot where it happens and you're like, oh yeah, and it's those are cool. Everything looks good. Everything looks interesting. They never really reused a cinema technique or a visual motif over and over again. Aside from the focal length thing, but that's used appropriately and very respectably. Ari Aster truly knows how to shoot this kind of thing, and he does it beautifully. He took chances with this film in terms of what he wanted to show on the camera, and it paid off immensely. It's a very good-looking film. Now, unfortunately, now we get to the opposite side of the technical side, and that's the audio. The mixing was great. I really liked the soundtrack. They don't get into creepy music right away, like Hereditary, of just that grungy, awful, creeping, just makes your skin crawl kind of music, because it doesn't immediately start off that these village fine folk are a threat. Obviously, we know it is a threat just because it's a horror movie, so we know that this shit has to get awful. But when watching it, we're accompanied to these beautiful greens and yellows and reds and crisp white with this gorgeous, like, serene blue sewn into these dresses that they wear. And we're given absolutely gorgeous instrumental with flute and string, and it all sounds gorgeous. And when does hit the fan and the music reflects it and ramps up a little bit, it gets a lot more evil and sinister, even without changing instruments entirely. So that's really cool. While the mixing is great, the sound editing is pretty awful, actually, and it's a really weird step back. Obviously, now that we're dealing with these wide open areas of conversation where, you know, people enter a scene, add their thing, they leave, we hear background dubbing, stuff like that, you would expect there to be, you know, a bit of a fine focus and attention put on this because you want to make sure it looks good. We don't really get that in this, which is weird. The background audio levels are great, the mixing is good, but what's weird is there's a lot of ADR. And obviously that's, you know, should be expected because, you know, characters are talking and they're not always going to be on screen. You know, if the group walks into a room and we focus on Danny's reaction to this and everyone else kind of, you can see in the frame, kind of disperses and goes their own way and talks about how great the thing looks. But there's one absolutely awful example of Mark, who is essentially the kind of the douchebag frat boy in the film. He just has the most dumb lines ever, and they're dubbed in after the fact, and they're almost set to the exact same level as Danny. And even though he is rather close to her, he is just enough away to where they should have made it quieter, and who gives a shit about these lines? I'll throw up an example here.
Not a lot of privacy.
Yeah, what do you do when you need to jerk off? Especially with all these dicks on the wall. There's a lot of dicks. Oh, you got some pussy paintings too.
See, man, that guy dismissed me, but this is exactly like the Science and the Cult of Endor.
It doesn't matter. Mind you, if you're watching this, you might not pick that up, but I'm nitpicking this specific detail because, like, the amount of quality he put into his shots and the way he strung them all together, and all of that is fabulous. The acting is great. Aside from a few things that I'll mention a little bit later in terms of acting, but those might be a little spoilery. And it's such a shame, though, to see such bold strides taken in new directions, but still keeping to Aster's style. And just f***ing up that bad on audio stuff is just a shame. In terms of, like, audio, like, editing and, like, mixing, I would say the best example, and this is a extremely basic bitch kind of thing, would be Social Network.
I was crashing there for a little bit while I'm taking care of some things, but she's done for the summer, so she's back at her parents' place.
The homeless rock star Palo Alto.
All right. What's your plan for the summer? Mark.
So, technically, it's like just the technical side has given this film a lot of points, and then the sound thing is a problem, and that takes it down a little bit. So obviously, this is going to be another 9 out of 10 film. But where the biggest stumbling is in the script. Script and
the story too. I guess I'm going to switch into elevated spoilers, and if you're new to this, elevated spoilers just kind of vaguely tells about what happens. Stuff that you could imply from the trailer happens, but more about how the structure happens and how things play out and progress. Not saying, Danny caps Mark in the head and runs away. It would be more like Danny and Mark have, tension rises or something like that. So, welcome to Elevated Spoilers. The script is awful. It starts off, not awful, but the script leaves a lot to be desired. It starts off extremely intriguing with all this interesting stuff between the friends and conflict there, and the tension with Danny and what happened to Danny is really, really interesting and great. And and Danny's connection with Christian and with who they might have a little thing, but just never realized, and that's all very interesting to watch. Ari Aster knows how to shoot this stuff in a scene. So, like, in a scene of 4 people and 2 more introduced, or I guess in this case 3 people and 2 more introduced, you can just watch one character on the scene and see how, in the frame, and watch how they react to what Danny says or what Christian says, and it's all very interesting. And then the moment they get to Sweden, it's like a lever is switched, and automatically they retain all the interesting, like, turmoil and tension they had back in America, but now they just become kind of pawns or pieces in this grand horror narrative. And it's really a shame, because all of that interesting stuff is still there, but there's a lot more. This character is only doing this to segue the film into Act 2, or this character, it makes sense for him to do this, but he's going about it a little aggressively, and then that becomes, another plot doodad later on in the film, and that really, really hurts, because Hereditary flows so well, too. Well, that's embarrassing. I guess I should have turned my phone off during the procedure. No, Amazon, I don't want to buy more movies. Sorry about that. And with Hereditary, it's the only problem I had, and I mentioned this in my review of Hereditary, in the review of Hereditary entitled My Thoughts on Hereditary, in where a video I talked about Hereditary. If you haven't seen it, if you want to know more about Hereditary, or you want to know my thoughts on Hereditary, you should watch that video about Hereditary. I'm so funny. The way Hereditary pans out is that there seems to be one, like a little iffy, like, oh, don't go there, because we've gone there before. And, of course, I'm not going to say what it is, but it's bothersome, but the film realizes that, this is overdone, this is trite, let's change it. And they do. Very quickly in the film, it's kind of reversed. And it's interesting, too, because that was supposed to be kind of an easy way for the viewer to get happiness, and just kind of an easy way for the plot to progress and wrap up, essentially. And then Hereditary says, "F you, you don't get that, we're doing our own thing." And some of the way that the characters act, I have a bit of a theory that goes into 100% tinfoil hat conspiracy that I'll get to a little bit later, about subverting horror tropes, but I don't know if Ari Aster is a good enough writer to do that. I'll get to that later, though. So, with a weak script, and it plays out exactly how you would think it would. The characters are essentially just, it's like they're axed off typical horror movie style, which is a shame. I say it's a shame, but I don't really know how I could improve it. I'll get to that a little bit later. So, the script ain't that great, dog. It ain't that great. And towards the end, it's extremely watchable, and the gore is fabulous, and it's all great. I probably should have mentioned this earlier, but in terms of, like, should I take my kids to this? Please don't take your kids to it unless you want them to grow up to be little killers or something. it earns its R rating, and to be completely honest, I'm surprised that it was shown in actual like theater chains. I'm not sure if it was shown at Cinemark back in Helena, but it was shown at the Regal Cinema in Bozeman, which is something else too, because this features full nudity on both sides, extended nudity, long, just prolonged graphic violence, drug use, all that kind of stuff. But I'm surprised that wasn't shown at like an independent theater, because that seems like much more up its style, much more fitting of its style. Funnily enough, this film reminds me a lot of Suspiria in terms of content, and Suspiria did not get that great of a wide release, mainly because it wasn't A24. I love A24. I'll do a video thing on that later. So it's interesting to see that content was able to be shown. So even though, like what I mentioned about the content though, it's still extremely watchable. It's a really, really, really fun movie. Visually, it's a treat. That paired with the horrific violence and the way that it pans out is really interesting and extremely watchable, like I said. So I definitely recommend you see this film or rent it from Redbox or pirate it or do what you gotta do. But don't pirate it, you silly bastard, because that's how people get stitches or whatever the expression is. I would really recommend it there. The problem I had with it though is that the pacing, while good, it's still pacing a script that isn't that interesting. It doesn't really do anything new. And I'll talk more about that in spoiler land, but the climax is just kind of a final like reincorporation and kind of essentially tying up loose ends with the whole Danny and Christian relationship problem. And it's interesting, but I just wish they did more with it. And I wish it didn't start off with that interesting dichotomy and then just kind of dick around bullshit land, which was all interesting and visually gorgeous and it was fun to watch. But then it doesn't really tie narratively back to that. And then the ending it's like, oh yeah, the first part, yeah, woo! I think the film was about, it might have been 2 hours and 50 minutes, I'm not sure. But it was well paced out, I enjoyed it. It's just such a shame to see such a downgrade in terms of script. So I guess now let's get on to the spoilers. Yeah, of course the blacks die first. Yeah, it's everyone essentially, like, the way that everyone got pawned off, that was to be kind of expected, but still kind of a shame. Mad props too, though, for Ari Aster able to capture the spooky, awful, initial, gross, thingy-jigger, awful, dead corpse of somebody that is important, yeah, that he did from Hereditary. In this case, the carbon monoxide or carbon dioxide, I'm not entirely sure which one, I'm not a science major, but the tracking shot of inside the house, and we see Johnny, Danny, Jenny. Gosh, I really need to get my head on my ass for these reviews. But seeing her sister just vomit all over with just that tube in her throat, her eyes just ripped to shit next to the computer was just awesome. That and the track that played was Gassed, and that was a fabulous goddamn track, which fit more with Hereditary. But again, we have that track, and then it not segues directly, but moves on into more beautiful, like, flute and whirlwind kind of feel, and that's so cool that the film was able to do that. Even though it just was kind of underwhelming script-wise, though, the symbolism I really, really liked of, everyone you loved in your family is now dead due to a sudden and shocking act of violence, and the very first thing we see in terms of the festivities is a shocking act of violence of the older couple just getting brained, and that was interesting. And I was thinking to myself, I like that, but then the film just kind of, it's like, okay, well, that was really cool, let's make sure the audience gets it. So they just have the mom and dad, like, on the rock with Danny on the rock too, and she has a dream sequence where she, like, a movie, I was going to give you credit, and I understand not wanting to leave anyone behind, but this is an R-rated film. Like, there's not going to be kids in the audience to, want to explain this to them and maybe get them into, like, the deeper meaning of, like, symbolism and shit. I thought it was interesting, but you ruined it by saying that. And all the deaths later on too, which is dumb. Of Josh getting clubbed in the head, that was a well shot scene, and I thought it was scary. Of like his body just lingering there and then just dragged off, but that doesn't really add anything. He overstepped his bounds. He was essentially Kid Icarus. He was essentially Icarus and just kind of just got too greedy. Mark's death was retarded. Like, if they moved the tree into the woods, and then they came back, and then he pissed on the tree, and then somebody saw him pissing on the tree, then that would be fine. But it's like, I gotta go piss. Let me just go behind a vaguely, waist-high object to censor my penis, and then I'm going to urinate in broad daylight. Like, that was dumb, and the only reason that was there was just to cause more tension, and to essentially switch from, I would say, like, the next act to the other. And it sucks, because it's so obvious. That doesn't add to Mark's character, it doesn't add to the story, it doesn't add to developing tension, it just hits a switch that says, alright, now we have more tension, and it's such a waste. I can't remember the two Londoners. Like, that was interesting, too, and obviously you knew that some tomfuckery was happening, and hearing her scream on top of while these characters are just going about their day was cool. But people might have missed it, so let's do it 3 times. One with Mark dicking around outside of the temple, of Danny cooking, and then I can't remember the third one. I believe Josh was in the temple looking at the book. And again, first time, oh, that's kind of cool. Second time, oh. Third time, you're doing it again. And it's just a shame. An absolute shame. And I just feel underwhelmed by it. The ending, I really, really liked. I thought that, like, the whole ending scene and all the way that all that panned out with, like, them crying, the women of the community crying with Danny and, like, being with her suffering, and then all the women who were with Christian, essentially enjoying in his sexual pleasure. I liked that. The dichotomy between that was interesting. But it just ends with, let's just throw him in a bear and burn him and away we go. But the weird thing is, and now this gets into more, like, deeper analysis of the film, is at the point when she was in her complete floral, not even gown, it was more of just an anthill of flowers, and she had that little pouty face going on, and all the members were all, like, so excited, and they had the goddamn bingo machine, and they wheeled Christian out in the sanitarium wheelchair thing. That's when I realized, shit, this is just an overly violent breakup movie, isn't it? And at the core, that's what it is. It is an overly violent and dramatized relationship movie. But I had so much more high hopes for it, and that's when I realized, oh gosh, I need to be laughing now, don't I? Because that's when things get weird, and I don't want to say jump the shark, because the whole film it's overt, in your face. We're not gonna characterize these people very much, and they do a little bit in terms of their morality on things, but at the end of the day, we're down 9 people, and we're up 1 queen, who apparently is just gonna stay in the commune forever and find her family. Which, and again, it's interesting, and it plays off of interesting themes of, trying to connect and have somebody feel your sorrow who doesn't understand what that sorrow is like, nor is he willing to put himself in a mindset to understanding and comprehending your sorrow. That's interesting. What's not interesting is having all that play out hard in the first act, kind of be backburnered for horror tropes to happen, and then come back with a vengeance in the third act, and then just end. So honestly, it's disappointing, really. One other theory that I had when I watched it for the second time was I thought there was, and this is certainly there, but I was putting way too much focus on it, the fact that we were given Swedish, who, while on the car ride over, they mentioned that, why are Swedish women so hot? And that's because, the Vikings stole all the attractive women, and just kind of having this feeling of kind of background violence, I guess, if that makes sense, and just implied horrific violence narratively, not, because we're watching the film, we know it's gonna get kind of fucky, but knowing that, they have kind of a history with kind of, brutal, violent mentality, and that building in the background, in the way the script perceived it, while thinking to yourself, it's interesting that that's what we're given, and we see them extremely polite and kind of kind and, held back a little bit. So I thought there might have been some interesting, ideas on like race and nationality playing in with when the horrific violent thing happens for the first time. They react very poorly to it, and it's interesting to see them and the Americans kind of just are blasé about it, which I thought was an interesting comment on Americans' consumptions of violence, a la Funny Games. But I realized I was looking way too into it, because then shortly after that, the Americans just kind of bicker, and then the London ideas out of the way, and then the Swedes just become violent. And I thought some interesting stuff might have been at play there, but it turned out not really. So I don't know. My final thoughts on this film was I was obviously positive. Like I said, the cinematography shot, all that stuff is great, and visually it's a very gorgeous film. And I really liked it. But the script leaves a lot to be desired, and when you have poor writing being dubbed in ADR, it makes it even more jarring and kind of gross. So that I really did not like one bit whatsoever. And the climax, while, you know, it's cool for a horror movie, I think Ari Aster could have done a little bit more with the second and third act. So I originally gave Hereditary a 10 out of 10, but that I think was a little extreme, so I bumped it back down to a 9 out of 10, which is still a fabulous score, and it's one of my favorite films of 2018, I guess. But with Midsommar, it's like he improved technically on so many levels, but devolved in the nitpicky audio thing, and the script just was blah. The characters weren't as interesting, the dichotomy wasn't as interesting between the characters. It was interesting and different in this than in Hereditary, and I'm not just trying to compare Hereditary to this, and so this film will never get a breath. But Ari Aster has made improvements, and that is interesting to see. But seeing him just kind of throw it away, or not throw it away, but focus on weird, more conventional horror-y things, is just kind of disappointing. So my final view on this film, I don't know, it's tough though, because I wanted to give it an 8 out of 10, but I don't know though. I don't know, I guess I don't do half numbers, nor do I really do numbers, because giving a work of art a number is just kind of stupid.
I rushed right over as soon as I got your call. You came to the right man. I happen to be a self-proclaimed Haneke expert, if I say so myself.
Well, I'm sure your knowledge of bullshit is limitless.
So I would definitely say go watch this film. If you're all right with horrifically violent and sexual content, and you just kind of want to have just kind of a gorgeous-looking fever trip of just awfulness, please do enjoy. It's great. I personally like Suspiria. Well, original, of course, but the remake hits a lot of the same beats as this, but I think is an infinitely more interesting film. But do watch both. Both are very different films, but I would probably give this I don't know, 7 out of 10, I would say. Definitely recommend it. The acting is great for the most part. It's hard to act, for certain characters, it's hard to act when, you know, bad choices are made in terms of how your character was developed. But for the most part, they did a good job. It's visually interesting. I liked it. I just don't really have the excitement or the fever to talk about it like I did with Hereditary. But I would say that's pretty much my thoughts. So, thank you much. I apologize for the brick incident. That won't happen again. All my reviews will now be extremely prompt and relevant. So, yeah, that's all I got. Have a good one.
This is a waltz thinking about
Hey, quick question. Is it done yet?
It's done. No, he's fine.
Yeah, no, I get it. You got your...
He's working on something. Could be Phantom Thread, but I honestly don't give a shit.
Uh-huh.
You asked me to hit him.
Yep.
Matters so much to you, then why couldn't you do the job?
Yeah, no, it's fine. You're good.
Who do you think you are, John?
Yeah, no, I get it. You got stuff to do, whatever.
John, I got shit to do. I can't run around being your errand boy all day.
Okay, well, no, I guess I'll talk to you later then.
Thanks.
Okay, bye. Not yet, Johnny. But soon. Very soon.
the ground on which we stand.
I've been thinking more about it. Honestly though, I've kind of been thinking more about it, real talk though. I've been thinking more about it, and honestly, I'm not entirely sure if I like Midsommar more than Hereditary.
Motherfucker! Ow!
You okay?
Ow!